Jerry Agar for Ezra Levant. If you don't toe the line on global warming hysteria, you're not welcome at the hysteria meeting. The UK's Lord Monckton was thrown out of the meeting in Doha, stripped of his credentials and shipped home. Lord Monckton joins me now. Welcome.
Well, it's very nice to be with you, Jerry, and God bless you all across the pond. It really wasn't quite as bad as you say. I wasn't ejected, evicted, expelled or deported, as various excited left-wing reporters suggested. It was pointed out to me that I wasn't welcome, and I was a very bad boy. As a mere accredited observer, I didn't have the right to speak at the meeting I spoke at. I spoke only for 40 seconds, right at the end of the day, when everybody else had had their say, so I don't think any very great harm was done. But they did feel it was something of a breaking of the rules, and rightly so. However, there was no other way that people who have studied the science of this and concluded that there isn't a problem with the climate, there hasn't been any warming for 16, 17, even 18 years on some measure, certainly not for 16 years, that even if there had been any warming, it's cheaper to do nothing about it and adapt to it later than to try Canute-like, futilely and very expensively to stop it now. And therefore, I said, what we really need is a new independent scientific inquiry to establish whether any of these conferences are going in the right direction or whether we really need to have them at all. And the delegates had never heard this point of view before. The mainstream media never project it, of course. They never give us the time of day on this. And of course, at all these official conferences, anyone who says what I said gets the reaction that I got. They shrieked, they howled, they were furious, they were angry. All their cherished beliefs came tumbling down in the face of a very simple fact. No global warming for 16 years, which means global warming can't have caused Hurricane Sandy, it can't have caused Typhoon Popa, it can't have killed all those people because it isn't happening. It really is as simple as that.
Well, yes, and when we look at the chart we just saw, and as you laid out, we haven't had for some 16 years an increase in temperature. You'd think that would be a pretty interesting point to discuss with people like Michael Mann or Al Gore, but they refuse to even discuss it. And that's one thing, but what I find tragic, and you mentioned the media, is so much of the media seems disinclined to report on this at all.
Well, this is where I think it's very extraordinary. Let's take one example. We have a Marxist paper here called The Guardian, which I use in my lavatory at home. And The Guardian had a comment on me today, and then somebody tried to add a footnote. You know, you can send in your own comments on the article by the journalist, and somebody said, look, you know, he was right. There was no global warming for 16 years. Now, that comment was taken off the air and off the website by the moderators within 2 minutes. So the guy who sent it again. It was wiped out again, this time within seconds, and the entire stub indicating he'd tried to make that comment also vanished. Now, what this means is that they are frightened. They are worried. That's why they so overreacted to my making this very simple point in Doha. There has been no global warming for 16 years, virtually not since this entire process of 18 annual conferences of the UN on climate started. And because of that, there really isn't any need for these conferences. There's no need for the West to shut itself down in the name of saving the planet, particularly even if there were the problem they said, and even if it were cost effective, which it isn't, to do anything about it. The fact is that China's emissions are now rising so fast, and rightly so, because the cheapest way to lift your people out of poverty is to give them fossil-fueled, reliable, cheap electricity. They are soon going to be emitting more CO2 than the entire Western world added together. You could close us down and the atmosphere simply wouldn't notice the change. It's China that's the big boy now, and it cannot afford not to allow its people to have the electricity that we can take for granted. So of course it's going to go on building fossil-fueled power stations, rightly so, and as long as it does that, whatever we do is going to make absolutely no difference to the climate at all. But this kind of reality is not allowed to be talked about at UN climate conferences.
Well, and I think the reason for that, Lord Monckton, is because back when Kyoto took place, choice, and the Bill Clinton administration refused to get on board. Hardly a bunch of wild-eyed right-wing fanatics when it came to anything. It was because they realized that a lot of this from the United Nations and some quarters even within the United States is to actually take on the American economy.
Well, that, of course, is very shrewd. This is essentially the same kind of anti-Americanism which fuels the European Union. And now it's going global via the UN. And they are trying to shut the US down. And of course, you have one of your two parties there very willing to shut the US down in the name of saving the planet from a non-problem. I find this very strange. But of course, the US Senate was very sensible. The Clinton administration was as flaky as you said it wasn't. It did want to sign up to Kyoto. But under the presidency of the Senate of Albert Arnold Gore, and by the way, Al Baby, if you're listening, I'm still waiting for that debate I challenged you to 5 years ago, and I still haven't had an answer. What is it that you're frightened of? But under his presidency of the Senate voted on whether they would ever sign a treaty such as Kyoto, which bound the West to destroy its economies without imposing any restrictions on the third world economies, from which from now on the real trouble, the real CO2 emissions are going to come, if you call CO2 emissions trouble. And the vote was 95-0 against having anything like a Kyoto treaty. And I don't see that changing very much now. No doubt some of the communists, I mean the Democrats, are going to say, well, we would vote for such a treaty now. But the Republicans are not. The blue, what do they call them? The blue dog Democrats, they're not going to vote for it. And there's no way you're going to get 67 members of the Senate voting for any treaty like Kyoto. Even if they did, even if America joined. China isn't going to play. Russia isn't going to play. Canada has actually left the protocol. Effectively, so have Russia and Japan. Brazil can't afford to play. It's not going to happen.
Thank you very much.
Real pleasure.